My name is Claire Johnson. I'm 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet one in my family, the one they overlooked, the one they dismissed. At Sunday brunches, while my brother Daniel soaked up all the praise I learned to swallow silence with cold coffee and harder bread. He loved to throw his words like knives, saying I was still struggling to eat 3 meals a day. It stung, but I never let him see me break. What he didn't know was that every cruel word, every smirk across the table, was quietly fueling something far greater than him. I built in silence. I endured in the shadows. And one day, the very paycheck he bragged about would carry my name. This is the story of how humiliation turned into revelation, of how the truth waited patient and steady until it could no longer be ignored. Have you ever wondered what happens when the one they mock the most turns out to be the one holding all the power? Stay with me. The Maple Street Cafe in Portland always smelled of warm bread and roasted coffee beans. That Sunday in October, the place glowed with golden light pouring through its tall, arched windows. The kind of light that could make even chipped wooden tables look precious. My family had claimed one of those tables, as we often did. My father, Robert, had taken the seat at the end, his shoulders straight, as if he wanted everyone in the cafe to see that he was still a man of stature even after retirement. My mother, Linda, sat beside him, her silk scarf tucked just so at her neck, her eyes darting around nervously, as if she already knew something unpleasant was coming. I sat across from my brother Daniel. He leaned back in his chair, his navy jacket straining against his frame, the knot of his tie a little too loose. He had the look of someone who believed the room was his stage. His smile had that sharp edge I had known since childhood, the kind that cut without needing to raise his voice. He waited until everyone's cups were filled and plates were set before striking, as if he wanted the silence to work in his favor. Still struggling to eat 3 meals a day, huh? His voice carried across the table, too loud, meant to sting. The words hit me harder than I expected, though. I should have seen them coming. Daniel always knew how to aim at the softest part of me, the part I never showed anyone else. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my eyes on the plate in front of me. A piece of toast had gone cold, its butter stiff and pale. My hand gripped the fork so hard my knuckles whitened. My mother gave a quick, nervous laugh and spoke about the weather, how the leaves around Laurelhurst Park had turned such a brilliant red this year. Her voice was soft, hopeful, desperate to move us away from the cruelty that hung over the table. My father cleared his throat, his eyes shifting from me to Daniel, and asked Daniel about his latest project on Wall Street, as if that could patch the rip Daniel had just made in the air. No one looked at me. No one told Daniel to stop. No one said that was enough. I lowered my head, hiding behind the curtain of my hair. The toast sat there, heavy uneaten. That toast became something more than food. It was the silence I carried the weight of every time I had been dismissed, overlooked, or made into the family's quiet embarrassment. It was proof that no one expected me to defend myself, not here, not ever. Inside, words rose up like fire, but I swallowed them down. If I had spoken, it would have sounded like begging. If I had argued, it would have looked like weakness. So I stayed still, listening to the hum of conversation around us, the scrape of cutlery, the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Life went on for everyone else, but at our table, I shrank into my corner. I felt the sting of Daniel's gaze again. He leaned forward, a smirk tugging at his lips, satisfied at my silence. He looked at me the way someone looks at an old painting in a hallway, faded and irrelevant. I wanted to disappear, but instead, I stared harder at that piece of toast. My chest rose and fell slowly, carefully, as I tried to keep the shame from spilling out onto the table. In my mind, I spoke though no one else could hear me. I have learned to live in the shadows. I have learned to find my strength in silence. While the rest of you chase applause, I have built something you cannot see, a world that belongs to me alone. My father's voice cut back in praising Daniel's quick thinking on some trade I barely understood. My mother nodded eagerly, proud, relieved that the spotlight was back where she thought it belonged. Daniel laughed, basking in the glow. I let them have it. It cost me nothing to remain still. But beneath my stillness, something else stirred. The shame that Daniel thought he had given me did not burn the way it used to. Instead, it cooled, hardened, settled deep inside me like stone. Every cruel word, every laugh at my expense, every silence from the people who should have protected me, they became bricks. And brick by brick, I had already been building something out of sight. Daniel thought he had won with one sharp comment. He thought he had proven again that I was the weak one. But as I sat there tasting the bitterness of coffee gone cold and the dryness of toast left untouched, I knew the truth. He did not know who I was anymore. He did not know what I had become. I lifted my cup and took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter, lukewarm, almost unbearable. Yet I swallowed it, feeling it slide down my throat, anchoring me in the moment. My hands steadied. Around me, my family's voices blurred together a chorus of weather reports, market predictions, and half-hearted jokes. They thought the brunch had moved on. They thought the insult had landed and vanished. But inside me, it stayed. It would stay until the day I no longer needed to explain myself. Until the day the truth would rise without me having to force it. And so I stayed quiet. Quiet as the world they did not see me build. Quiet as the future that was already waiting just beyond their imagination. The toast remained untouched. I let it sit there cold and lifeless, while inside something very different began to breathe. I was 12 the night my birthday was quietly swallowed by Daniel's triumph. The kitchen smelled faintly of vanilla frosting, and the smoke of 12 crooked candles flickering on a cake that looked smaller than it should have. I remember leaning forward, drawing in a breath to blow them out when the front door burst open and the sound of cheering feet filled the hallway. Daniel strode in with his basketball jersey still clinging to him, sweat shining on his temples, and in his hand, a golden trophy that gleamed like it had swallowed the sun. My mother gasped, as if she had been waiting her whole life for that moment. My father's face broke into a grin so wide it seemed to erase the rest of us. The candles in front of me flickered uncertainly as the room tilted toward him. I sat still in my chair, hands folded in my lap, watching as the cake grew colder. The song that had just begun died in someone's throat.
Right now,
chairs scraped against the linoleum as they all gathered around Daniel, voices rising with laughter and congratulations. My father clapped him on the back with that proud, booming laugh, and my mother rushed to clear a spot on the mantel, sweeping aside framed photos to give his trophy the center place. No one noticed me staring at the little cake. The wax from the candles dripped onto the frosting, making small puddles that hardened before I ever had a chance to make a wish. My heart pounded not from excitement, but from the familiar ache of being forgotten. Then through the noise, I felt a hand on my shoulder. My father crouched beside me, his proud expression softening as he looked into my eyes. He did not say much. He simply slipped a box into my lap. It was heavy, wrapped only in brown paper. I tore it open quietly, revealing an old laptop scuffed along the edges, the keys slightly worn. It was not new, not flashy like Daniel's trophy, but in that moment, it was more to me than anything else in the room. I hugged it close to my chest, the hum of Daniel's laughter carrying through the house like thunder, while I sat there in the quiet rain of my own disappointment. Later, when the celebration for Daniel had moved outside, and fireworks from the neighbors lit up the summer sky, I climbed the stairs to my room with the laptop pressed against me. My room smelled of old books and detergent. I placed the computer on the small desk by my window and pressed the power button. It whirred to life slowly, as if waking from a long sleep, the glow from its screen spilling across the walls. I touched the keyboard, my fingers trembling. I had no idea what I was doing, but I typed anyway. Letters appeared on the screen, clumsy lines of code copied from a book I had borrowed from the library. Most of it did not work. Error messages flashed in red, mocking me, but I kept going. Each successful line was like planting a seed. Each mistake was just a stone I had to move aside. Outside, the sky erupted with fireworks, red and gold sparks falling like rain. They were loud, brilliant, and gone in seconds. I glanced at them once, then turned back to my screen. The pale blue light was steady, unwavering, like a flashlight beam in the dark.
Closed pizza, I guess.
Fireworks
or
dazzled
pizza,
crowds.
How you call it?
A flashlight
like a
guided you when you were alone.
Pizza.
That night I realized which light would
Pretty
matter
good.
more to me.
And some coffee.
The glow of that laptop became my
But
comfort,
that's
my
the only
companion.
thing I've had today.
Every click
this
of the
is the
keys was a
legendary
heartbeat
spot
steady and
I
loyal.
saw
While Daniel's
Seagull
victories
eating a
filled our
fucking
living room with
pigeon
applause, I built my own
live.
quiet triumphs in solitude.
Well, there's some
I did
little
not need
girls
cheers.
like being on
I only
TikTok.
needed the steady hum of that machine, the soft
Holy
rhythm
shit.
of progress no
That
one else
was,
could see. As days turned into months, I learned to
humbling
hide in
as
that light.
fuck.
My parents spoke endlessly about Daniel's games, his coaches, and his bright future.
And this is that
Their voices
exact
blended
spot.
into a blur as I sat upstairs typing, experimenting, failing, and trying again. Sometimes I pressed my ear to the floorboards and heard their laughter downstairs. I pressed my
nature
fingers
can be
harder on the
rude,
keys,
man.
as if each keystroke could carve my place into the world. On my 13th birthday, Daniel brought home another medal. My cake was smaller that year, the frosting barely covering its surface. I did not cry. I had already learned. That night when I opened the laptop and saw the cursor blinking on the screen, I felt a quiet defiance. It was not applause, but it was mine. Even now, decades later, I can still recall the sound of those keys under my fingers. That laptop was old, heavy, sometimes unresponsive, but to me, it was a doorway. It told me I had a world where Daniel's shadow could not reach a place where I was not forgotten. I often think about that night, the candles melting into the cake while everyone cheered for him. My father's soft whisper comes back to me. You'll find your own way with this. And I did. Fireworks fade. A flashlight burns steady. That lesson shaped me more than I understood at 12. Daniel's world was built on applause and trophies. Mine was built in silence, guided by a steady light no one else cared to see. That memory lives with me not as a wound anymore, but as a foundation. Every time Daniel tried to belittle me later, every time his voice carried that same smugness, I remembered the glow of that laptop. It was enough then, and it is enough still. The past may have blurred, but that night is sharp in my mind as if carved in glass. And even though my childhood felt overshadowed, I see now that being overlooked gave me the space to build something of my own. That was the beginning of my world, lit not by fireworks, but by a steady flame that has never gone out. By the time I turned 29, I had learned to live in the shadows. Silence had become my shield, and work had become my language. In 2015, I left Portland for Seattle, carrying little more than an old suitcase, my worn laptop, and a determination no one in my family believed I had. Daniel had just closed another deal on Wall Street, and my parents spoke of him like he was the axis on which our world spun. I didn't argue. Instead, I slipped into a rented garage in a neighborhood that smelled of gasoline and damp concrete, and I began building a world of my own. That garage became the birthplace of Datasphere. The rent was cheap, the paint was peeling, and rain often dripped through the roof in the winter. Still, when Michael Rivera joined me there, the space felt charged with possibility. Michael had been a college acquaintance of mine, the kind of man who could make numbers sound like stories. He had a way of holding a room with his words, even when his suit was wrinkled and his shoes scuffed. While he spent his days pitching to investors and knocking on doors that I could never bring myself to approach, I stayed behind, crouched over a screen lit with endless lines of code. The garage was often cold, our breath visible in the winter mornings, but I did not care. My fingers flew across the keyboard, chasing the logic that only I seemed to hear. The code became my voice, my rebellion against years of being ignored. Michael would return late in the evenings, his face tired but lit with hope, dropping stories about the skeptical bankers and venture capitalists he had faced that day. Some had laughed him out of their offices. Others listened but turned him away. Yet he always came back shaking the rain off his coat, telling me that one day the right person would say yes. We worked like that for 3 years. The city outside never noticed us. Families hurried through the markets, buses roared down the avenues, and we stayed in that garage stubborn against the indifference of the world. I fixed bugs until my eyes burned. I tore apart my own designs, rebuilt them, then broke them again. Michael kept speaking, selling,
heavy-ass
believing.
bird.
We carried each other through the weight of disappointment, though we rarely admitted how heavy it was. In 2018, we finally caught our break. A regional bank in Seattle, struggling with outdated systems, agreed to let us try. They
That
handed us
bird's
their
like,
data skeptical, but desperate, and I
it's
sat for
heavier
nights
than
without
my
sleep,
head.
weaving their messy numbers into something coherent.
That's what
When the
makes
first
it
report
scary,
ran
too.
smoothly, showing patterns they had never seen before, the executive in
Turn up,
charge
man,
called us
turn
back
up.
in. His handshake was firm, his smile reluctant,
Turn
but
up.
real. That was the first contract. I remember standing in that gray conference room, the carpet worn, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead.
That's the opera
Michael
house,
looked
too.
at me like we had just climbed a mountain no one thought we could. I said little, but inside, I felt something bloom that I could never put into
Looking good.
words.
Looking
It was
good.
not about the money. It was the validation, quiet and undeniable, that all those nights in the garage had meant something. From there, trust spread slowly
wait,
but surely.
we've gone through
Word traveled,
the,
and soon hospitals
wrong
came to us
park,
curious
actually.
about what our system could
It's
do
the
with medical
one
records.
right after this.
I watched as our software began predicting outbreaks, helping doctors tailor treatments to individual patients. For the first time in my life, I felt that my work could reach beyond me, could touch lives I would never meet. It gave me purpose deeper than recognition ever could. The years blurred with effort, contracts grew larger. Investors who once ignored Michael now asked for his time. By 2022, DataSphere had become a name in its own right, valued at $120 million. I saw the numbers printed in glossy reports, the headlines celebrating a company born from nothing. But for me, it wasn't the valuation that mattered. It was the knowledge that every line of code I had written was still there, woven into the fabric of our systems, the quiet skeleton that held everything together. At the anniversary dinner that year, Michael raised a glass, his eyes shining with pride as the investors applauded. I sat at the back of the room, half hidden, listening. My heart swelled, but I did not move forward. I chose not to. Recognition was never what I wanted. I whispered the truth only to myself. I chose to stand backstage, not because I was weak, but because I was free. Free from the endless chase for approval that had haunted me since childhood. Free to let the work speak in a language that didn't need applause. The lines of code became my voice. Where Daniel had crowds and trophies, I had algorithms and systems. Where his triumphs were loud and fleeting, mine were silent but enduring. Sometimes I wondered if my family even knew what DataSphere was, or if they still thought I was the girl struggling to eat 3 meals a day. I never corrected them. Not yet. Let them believe what they want. Because I knew the truth. My silence did not surrender. It was power. Every keystroke, every late night, every bug fixed and system built was a declaration I exist, I matter, and one day they would see it too. That night after the celebration, I returned to my apartment in Seattle, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. The screen lit up its glow steady, just as it had been years before. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, feeling the familiar rhythm rise within me. The code scrolled across the screen, steady, precise, and beautiful. It was not applause. It was not fireworks. It was a flashlight burning in the dark, guiding me still. By 2017, Daniel was 32 and still wore the same gray suit he had bought fresh out of college. He called it his lucky suit, though the fabric had grown thin at the elbows and the lining hung loose at the seams. I always thought of it differently. To me, it looked like armor too worn to protect him anymore, a relic he refused to let go of. That year, he announced to our parents that he was launching his own marketing startup. He made it sound grand. He painted pictures of bold campaigns and global clients, of changing how people thought about advertising itself. At dinner, he leaned back in his chair, one hand tugging at his tie, as if he had already conquered the market. My father clapped him on the back, proud and hopeful, while my mother's eyes shone with the same admiration she always reserved for him. I stayed quiet, watching him describe office spaces and contracts that, as I later learned, never fully existed. The truth unraveled quickly. Within 12 months, creditors were knocking on his office door. I remember walking past his building in downtown Portland one afternoon. The blinds were drawn, the lights were off, and a notice was taped to the glass. It was over. Just like that, the grand empire had collapsed. But when he showed up at Sunday brunch in that same gray suit, he smiled as though nothing had happened. He called it a temporary setback, a stepping stone on the road to even greater ventures. My parents nodded, clinging to his words, as if they were gospel. I could see the strain in his eyes, though the way he avoided looking directly at me. In 2018, Daniel managed to land a managerial position at a small agency. He arrived there every morning, dressed sharp, carrying a briefcase that was more for show than substance. He spoke of staff meetings and strategy sessions, of how his team admired his leadership. But the truth caught up with him again. Within a year, his boss dismissed him, citing poor performance. The phrase was polite, but the meaning was brutal. He wasn't competent. He wasn't what he claimed to be. By then, his debts had multiplied. Friends stopped calling. Creditors sent letters that piled on his parents' kitchen counter. Yet Daniel still arrived at family gatherings with the air of a man about to close a major deal. He'd pat my father on the shoulder, lean across the table, and whisper about investors in California or clients in New York. My mother hung on to his every word, desperate to believe her son was still destined for greatness. I watched silent again from across the room. It was always the same scene. His suit pressed, his smile fixed, his stories elaborate but hollow. He wanted us to believe, and perhaps he wanted to believe it himself most of all. Sometimes when his voice lowered and his eyes darted, I caught a glimpse of fear. It was fleeting, quickly replaced by bravado, but I saw it. He was slipping and he knew it. The saddest part was how much he clung to that image. The suit became his mask, the uniform of a man he no longer was. He wore it to every dinner, every supposed business meeting, even on afternoons when he had nowhere to go. My parents thought it was professionalism. I knew better. It was desperation. I remember one evening in 2019. He had stopped by my parents' house for dinner. His cheeks were flushed from too much wine, and his hands trembled slightly as he lifted his fork. He spoke about a new project, a partnership with international clients he claimed to be courting. My father nodded solemnly. My mother smiled with relief. I saw the truth in the way Daniel's gaze dropped when no one was watching. There were no clients. There was no project. I kept my thoughts to myself. For years that had been my role. The quiet observer, the shadow. But inside me something was shifting. I pitied him, yes, but I also felt a cold recognition. He was building his life on illusions just as my family had built their pride on him. And the light he reached for, the applause and admiration he craved, was burning him alive. He clung to the light, but it consumed him. That suit, worn and fraying, was the last shield he had. To my parents, it was still the uniform of success. To me, it was a shroud covering a man who was already unraveling. Every time he straightened the lapels, I could almost hear the fabric groan under the weight of his lies. Daniel had always believed he was meant to stand in the spotlight. But as I watched him that year, slumped in his chair after another failed pitch, his tie loosened, his smile brittle, I realized something else. The spotlight he craved was never gentle. It was harsh, relentless, unforgiving. It revealed every flaw, every weakness, every crack in the facade. And Daniel, my brilliant brother, was being scorched by it. I remained silent that night at my parents' house. I let them believe his stories, let them toast to his future successes. But inside me, I knew the truth. He was already falling, and no story, no suit, no fragile dream could save him from the darkness closing in. And I wondered as I left their house and stepped into the cold night air whether he knew it too. The email came in just as the office lights dimmed for the evening. I sat alone in the quiet hum of the building, the glow of my screen casting a cold reflection across my face. Karen Lee, our head of HR, had forwarded me a candidate profile for the budget analyst position. I clicked it open with the absent-minded thought that it was just another resume among dozens. The name stopped me cold. Daniel Johnson, my brother. The room seemed to constrict around me, the low whir of the air conditioning suddenly sharp against my ears. I scrolled down, half expecting to find some other Daniel, some stranger who merely shared his name. But there it was in black and white. His education, his patched-together work history, dressed up with the polished language of someone trying too hard. Karen had even written a note at the top. Applicant displays remarkable confidence, strong communication skills, and presents an impressive resume. I laughed under my breath. It was not the kind of laugh that lightens a room, but a brittle sound that cracked like glass under strain. Confidence, communication, impressive. She saw only the mask, the same one he had worn for years, the same mask that had fooled my parents and charmed his friends, the same mask that had once silenced me at the dinner table. I stared at the screen, my hand hovering over the trackpad. The rejection button was right there. One click, and his name would disappear into the void. I imagined the satisfaction of slamming that door shut, of making sure our paths never crossed within these walls. My heart raced with the temptation. But something in me hesitated. I sat back, the leather of my chair creaking softly, and closed my eyes. For a moment I saw us as children, him laughing in the driveway while I stood by the window holding my old laptop close to my chest. He had always been in the light, and I in the shadow. And now, years later, he was knocking on a door I had built with my own hands, unaware that I stood guard behind it. It would have been so easy to say no. To cast him aside the way he had cast his debts onto others, the way he had tossed careless words at me across a cafe table. But an idea began to root itself in me, steady and deliberate. Perhaps the cruelest act was not rejection. Perhaps the true reckoning would come from letting him in. I opened my eyes and leaned forward again. My cursor hovered, then drifted slowly across the screen, each inch feeling heavier than the last. My hand trembled once, then steadied. With a measured breath, I pressed approve. The click echoed in the quiet office, louder than it should have been, sharp as a gavel striking wood. It was done. At that moment, I felt a shift inside me. It was not triumph, not relief. It was something quieter, darker, a recognition that this decision was no ordinary approval. It was a summons, a silent challenge. A choice to let the threads of karma weave themselves without interference. My phone buzzed on the desk, startling me. Karen had sent a quick thank you for the fast review. I typed back a short acknowledgement, my fingers steady now. She would never know what that click had meant, what history it had stirred. I shut my laptop and sat in the fading light of the office. Outside, the city of Seattle moved on without me, cars rushing through wet streets, neon signs flickering against the drizzle. But inside, time felt suspended, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge what had just been set in motion. I whispered to myself, the words heavy in the empty room. Let karma do its work. The words were not spoken for anyone else. They were for me, for the girl who had once been silent, for the woman who had learned the weight of patience. This was not vengeance delivered by my hand. It was the opening of a door and the certainty that what awaited on the other side would reveal him piece by piece, truth by truth. I gathered my things and left the office. The hallways echoed with the sound of my heels, the rhythm steady, purposeful. I could feel the night air waiting for me beyond the glass doors, cool and damp with the scent of rain. For the first time in years, I walked into it with no shadow clinging to me, only the faint hum of inevitability. Some decisions feel small in the moment, just another item on a to-do list, a click among many. But as I pulled my coat tighter and stepped into the Seattle night, I knew this one was different. This one had cracked open the past and invited it in, and nothing would be the same again. Daniel arrived that morning wearing the same gray suit he had worn to nearly every family gathering, its shoulders slightly worn, the cuffs fraying at the edges. Yet he carried himself with a swagger that made it seem, at least to him, like a tailored Armani. His shoes clicked too loudly against the polished floor of the Datasphere lobby, each step announcing his presence as if the building itself should acknowledge him. I was not there in person. My workdays were split between my home office and the quiet corners of our remote servers, but I had access to the cameras. From my screen, I watched him stride past the front desk with the false confidence of a man trying to mask desperation. He walked through the open space where rows of engineers tapped at keyboards, their eyes fixed on glowing monitors. They hardly looked up, too immersed in code and data streams to be distracted by a newcomer's bravado. Daniel, however, could not stand being ignored. He stopped at the first desk he passed, leaning casually against the divider, and asked the young analyst what budgeting model he was using. His tone was dismissive, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, as he remarked that he could straighten out the company's finances in no time. His voice carried across the room a little too loud, too eager to be overheard. I saw the analyst give a polite nod, the kind that masks discomfort. Across the office, a few whispered exchanges began, quick glances darting in Daniel's direction. I knew what they were saying because I had heard the same murmurs for years. They were talking about me, about the elusive co-founder who never stepped into the spotlight. The myth of my absence had grown in the company's halls. Some thought I was a silent investor who had long since moved on. Others believed I was just a legal formality, a name on paper to balance the books. Daniel caught snippets of the whispers. He laughed, shaking his head with the kind of disdain only he could wear so naturally. Probably just a name, I saw him mutter, half to himself and half for the benefit of anyone who might be listening. There's no such thing as a hidden partner. That's just a title on documents. On my end, watching through the grainy feed of the camera, I almost smiled. He was so certain, so dismissive, so blind to the reality that had been in front of him for years. His arrogance had not dimmed with failure. If anything, it had calcified, grown into armor he wore to shield himself from the world's judgments and his own regrets. He moved through the office like a man inspecting a property he thought he owned, pointing out where files should be stored, commenting on the lighting, even suggesting the front desk staff tighten up their greeting protocol. Some of the employees exchanged side glances, rolling their eyes, but most stayed quiet. They did not know who he was yet, not really. They just saw a new hire puffed up with self-importance, the kind that eventually deflates under the weight of real work. But I knew. I knew every gesture, every tilt of his chin, every forced laugh. And I knew what was coming. As the day went on, Daniel inserted himself into conversations that had nothing to do with his role, boasting about strategies he had once used to turn agencies around. He spoke as though he had been the architect of victories rather than the author of collapses. He brought up brunches at restaurants he could no longer afford, bragging about connections with investors who had long stopped taking his calls. He repeated himself, often circling back to the same lines, as if saying them enough times would make them true. Watching him, I thought of that morning at the cafe on Maple Street, when his words had cut through me like a blade. "Still struggling to eat 3 meals a day, huh?" The office buzzed with the low hum of machines, the soft clatter of keys, but I could almost hear his voice overlapping with the memory. The arrogance was the same, recycled in a different setting, still dressed in that tired suit that he thought disguised the truth. And yet, beneath the bravado, I caught flashes of something else. The way his eyes darted too quickly across the room when he thought no one was watching. The way his shoulders stiffened each time he passed the glass conference room where directors met. His confidence was not unshakable. It was brittle, fragile, a mask he had to hold in place with both hands. He didn't know that every move he made that day was being recorded not just by the cameras, but by the people around him. First impressions at Datasphere lingered, and his had already painted him as something between comic relief and a cautionary tale. As the hours stretched, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of my home office settle around me. I could feel the irony pressing in, heavy but almost poetic. He had walked into the heart of the empire he once mocked me for never having. He had paraded through its halls blind to the fact that my name was etched into every wall, every server, every contract. The arrogance he wore like a second skin was leading him step by step into a revelation that would tear that skin apart. For now, I let the thought rest. His first day was just the beginning, a performance of old habits and hollow pride. The stage was set, the whispers already weaving into a story he could not yet grasp. I closed my eyes, hearing his voice still echoing faintly through memory and machine. He thought he was rewriting his future. He didn't know it, he was walking straight into mine. It was late when the office had quieted into that strange hum of machines breathing in the dark. Daniel should have been gone hours ago, but his footsteps carried him further into the building down a hallway he had never paid attention to. He pushed a door open and found himself in the server room, a place employees rarely wandered without purpose. The air was cold, humming with the low pulse of cooling fans, the kind of sound that pressed against your chest and made your heart beat slower. And there I was. I didn't see him at first. My focus was on the console lines of code flowing across the monitor as I ran a test sequence. My badge, the one that granted me full access, hung loosely from my neck, catching the pale blue light and reflecting it in brief flashes. My fingers moved quickly over the keys, a rhythm I knew by heart, steady and precise. It was the same rhythm that had built the foundation of DataSphere itself. Daniel froze in the doorway. I could feel the shift in the air more than I could hear him. A hesitation, a presence. When I turned, his eyes were already locked on the badge, his jaw set tight, as if his mind was trying to hold on to something it couldn't quite grasp. Before he could speak, Michael's voice cut across the room. "Claire, review the AI proposal before Friday, will you?" His tone was brisk, clipped in the way of a man juggling deadlines, yet it landed with the weight of familiarity. Michael barely glanced at Daniel as he stepped back into the hallway, already answering someone on his phone. I gave the smallest nod in acknowledgement, my hand resting briefly on the console before I turned back to the monitor. It was an ordinary exchange, one of countless in the long years of work Michael and I had shared. But Daniel's expression told me he saw something else. His eyes narrowed, sharp questioning. He was piecing together details he hadn't noticed before. The way Michael had spoken to me, not as an employee, but as a partner. The way my badge glowed with permissions that far exceeded the role of an ordinary analyst. And the way I moved with certainty in a room he had never dared to step into. Daniel didn't ask. The words seemed to form at the edge of his mouth, but he swallowed them, letting silence take their place. Still his stare clung to me, searching for cracks in the surface for proof that the shadow of me he had always dismissed was now standing in full light before him. I kept my face calm, my breathing even, but inside I could feel his suspicion seeding itself, burrowing into the space between us. His pride would not let him accuse me outright, not yet. He needed to gather more to convince himself that what his instincts screamed was true. I glanced once at him before lowering my eyes to the screen again. In that brief moment I saw it clearly, his mind wrestling with itself. Pride against doubt, arrogance against the raw unease of realizing he did not know nearly as much as he had always believed. I could almost hear the whisper in his head, the one that had haunted him since we were children, the one he had always ignored. Something isn't right. That night, Daniel walked out of the server room without a word. But the look he left behind lingered heavy as a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. And I knew as surely as he did that his hunch was no longer just suspicion. It was the beginning of discovery. The numbers looked ordinary at first, a neat row of figures that should have faded into the background of Daniel's workday. But then he saw it. His own paycheck, his own name stamped on the line of the payroll system, and right below it the words, "Approved by C. Johnson." He blinked hard, leaning closer to the screen, as if distance might have warped the letters. The report had come from Mark Benson, the internal audit officer, a man known for his meticulous accuracy and his dry, predictable notes. Nothing in Mark's work ever surprised anyone. Yet here it was a detail that seemed to glow with a heat Daniel could feel in his chest. C. Johnson. He tried to steady his breathing. Johnson was not an uncommon name. Surely it was a coincidence. There were plenty of people who could fit those initials. It didn't have to mean Claire. It didn't have to mean his sister. But the thought wouldn't leave him. It pressed against the back of his mind with a rhythm almost as loud as his heartbeat. He clicked through to the payroll system, his fingers suddenly heavy on the keyboard like each keystroke was carrying the weight of a question he wasn't ready to ask. And then there it was again. Clear. Unmistakable. C. Johnson. He leaned back in his chair, his mouth dry, the room suddenly too small. A wave of disbelief rolled through him, followed by a sharp sting of anger. How could this be Claire, the sister he had mocked, the one he had dismissed as living in the shadows? Had her name attached to his paycheck? The idea itself felt absurd, almost insulting. He rubbed his forehead, trying to push the thought away. Maybe it was some kind of clerical overlap, a mistake, a duplicate name somewhere in the system. That had to be it. He clung to the possibility like a lifeline, but the more he stared at the screen, the weaker that excuse became. The thought struck him like a blow. What if it really was her? He remembered every brunch, every cold silence, every time he had looked at her with contempt. If she was tied to this company, to his paycheck, then everything he believed about her and about himself was wrong. He shut the laptop and pushed his chair back, but the screen's glow still seemed to hover in his vision. He couldn't shake it. Claire was connected. To the money, to the approvals, maybe to more than that. He stood and began pacing the length of the room, his footsteps loud in the quiet office. Each step echoed the shift inside him. The shock was still there, but beneath it, something new was stirring. A determination he hadn't felt in years. If there was truth here, he would find it. If Claire was more than the shadow he had always believed her to be, he would uncover every hidden detail. He couldn't stop at suspicion. He needed proof, concrete and undeniable, the kind that would leave no room for interpretation. So he sat back down, opened the system again, and began tracing the records. Every approval, every transaction, every line of data that bore the mark of C. Johnson. He scrolled deeper, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. The office was silent except for the soft tapping of keys and the hum of the air vents above him. For the first time, Daniel wasn't just an employee running through routine reports. He was an investigator pulling at a thread that could unravel everything he thought he knew. And as he worked, the certainty grew stronger inside him. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a mistake. Claire was woven into the fabric of DataSphere in a way he had never imagined, and he would not rest until he knew exactly how deep her influence ran. Daniel had spent hours combing through the payroll system, his eyes burning from the glow of the monitor, trying to convince himself that the initials on his paycheck were nothing more than coincidence. He told himself again and again that Johnson was a common name, that somewhere in the network of DataSphere there must be another employee with those initials. But suspicion gnawed at him with the persistence of hunger louder than the buzz of the office lights above his head. Finally, late one night, when the building was nearly empty and the janitor's cart had already passed twice down the hallway, he found his way into the secure archives. The files loaded slowly, layers of legal text unfolding on the screen until his eyes froze on a single entry that shattered every excuse he had built. Claire Johnson, co-founder and chief technical architect, 48%. Ownership. The letters blurred, then sharpened again, as if the system itself wanted him to read them twice. His throat tightened, and a sour taste filled his mouth. He dropped heavily into the chair behind him, the cushions sagging beneath his weight. The chair let out a low, uneven groan, not the crisp squeak he expected, but a weary sound like something giving way under pressure. He sat motionless. For years he had mocked me, his little sister, the one he believed would never rise above shadows, the one he had reduced to a single cruel line at brunch. Still struggling to eat 3 meals a day, huh? His words had cut like glass, sharp and deliberate. And now the truth towered over him in sterile legal font. The empire he thought he had entered by merit had my name engraved into its foundation. The paycheck he bragged about, the proof of his survival, bore my silent signature. Daniel pressed his palms against his face, the warmth of his skin doing nothing to block the image burned into his vision. My name sat there unmovable, like a mountain rising behind him, blotting out the illusion of his own importance. He pulled his hands away, staring at the monitor again, as if the words might have rearranged themselves in his absence. But they hadn't. They never would. Memories came rushing back uninvited and merciless. He saw my bowed head at Maple Street Cafe, the toast untouched, my silence mistaken for weakness. He saw my 13th birthday when his trophy had stolen the night, and I had clutched a second-hand laptop like a secret lifeline. He saw himself always in the center, the golden boy in a gray suit, while I lingered at the edges. He had thought my shadows meant absence. Now he understood they had been a shelter, a place where I was building something he could never imagine. The thought rose unbidden in his mind, not a voice from me, but a realization from him. You thought she survived on pity. Now you see. She was the one signing your paycheck all along. His chest tightened, each breath catching as though the air had thickened around him. For the first time in years, Daniel felt small. Not just humbled, but stripped bare, his armor of bravado torn away by the simple permanence of a legal document. The chair beneath him shifted again, its tired protest echoing the collapse inside him. It was as if even the furniture recognized the weight of what had landed. The office was silent, yet inside his head 1,000 voices clamored. Every cruel smirk, every false boast, every nod of approval he had coaxed from their parents with half-truths, all of it crashed together into a storm of shame and regret. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling, but he had nothing left to type. The words he had built his life on, confidence, charm, cleverness, had collapsed under the weight of a single line of text. Claire Johnson, co-founder, architect, nearly half the company. He leaned forward, his elbows digging into the desk, his forehead pressing against his clasped hands. He had believed that money made him a man of substance, that a paycheck was proof of his worth. And yet that paycheck had been routed through me, through the sister he had dismissed, ignored, belittled. The irony was so sharp it hurt. He thought of our father, who had praised his suits and his failed startups, who had clapped him on the back even when creditors came knocking. He thought of our mother, who had worried over his debts with soft words and hopeful glances. And he thought of me standing silent in every room, my hands folded, my voice swallowed, until silence became the skin I wore. Now he realized it had not been a weakness. It had been endurance, and endurance had built the data sphere. The screen glowed steadily, indifferent to his unraveling. The document did not soften or blur. It remained as it was, clear and undeniable. His pride, once unshakable, cracked under the permanence of that truth. He leaned back again, the chair groaning low, a sound almost human in its resignation. Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the screen, the weight pressing deeper with every passing second. He saw not just a company, not just an ownership percentage, but the collapse of the story he had told himself all his life, that he was the one destined for greatness, that I was merely the shadow. Now he knew. He had been wrong. The truth did not roar. It did not gloat. It sat quietly on the screen, steady as stone, a verdict that needed no witness. And Daniel, once so certain of his place, sat frozen in its judgment, with only the soft creak of a tired chair to mark the silence he could no longer fill. Rainier Glass Hall shimmered under 1,000 lights, its tall glass walls catching every glint of crystal and reflection of silk gowns. The air smelled faintly of champagne and polished wood, as if the room itself had been dressed for the occasion. I stood just off stage, the smooth weight of the black dress against my skin, reminding me of how far I had come. Michael straightened his tie beside me, his calm presence steadying the rhythm of my breath. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, voice rich and commanding. Please welcome the visionary co-founders of DataSphere, Claire Johnson and Michael Rivera. Applause thundered, not the polite tapping of hands, but a wave that shook the glass walls. For years I had hidden content to let the company speak through code and results. But tonight, there was no veil. Tonight I stepped forward. Michael spoke first, polished and gracious, thanking those who believed when no one else did. His words flowed like water. Then his hand brushed my elbow, a signal. My turn. The microphone caught the tremor of my first breath before I steadied it. I have never been a woman of speeches, I began. The silence folded around me. But I have been a woman of code. Every line I wrote, every night I stayed awake, stitching numbers into meaning, is here living in the datasphere. This company is not just our vision. It is every keystroke, every unseen moment of faith that tomorrow could be better. For a moment, even the chandeliers seemed to listen. Then slowly applause swelled again, filling every corner of the hall. My eyes found him at the back. Daniel. He wore the same gray suit, but now it clung to him like a weight. He held a glass of wine, but his grip faltered, liquid trembling at the rim until he set it down abruptly. His jaw was tight, his face pale, his chest rising and falling faster than it should. He did not look angry, not yet. He looked cornered, like a man whose script had been torn from his hands. In the past, he had always had words ready, sharp, mocking, loud enough for everyone to hear. But here in this hall of applause, he had none. His mouth parted slightly as if to speak, but no sound came. His silence was different from mine at Maple Street Cafe. Mine had been forced, pressed on me by humiliation. His was stripped, stolen by truth. I held his gaze only long enough for him to know this was deliberate. That this moment belonged not to pride or revenge, but to the quiet return of balance. Every careless insult, every brunch where I had been dismissed now hung between us, reversed without me needing to lift a finger. The audience rose, clapping harder, their cheers echoing against the glass. Michael smiled beside me, nodding with the ease of a man used to such recognition. I gave a single nod, no bow, no flourish. My words had already done their work. Daniel did not clap. His hands hung stiff at his sides. His eyes darted once toward the exit, then back to me as if torn between fleeing and watching the ground collapse beneath his feet. His breathing betrayed him, shallow, uneven, as though each round of applause pressed harder against his chest. That was the difference. Once it had been me shrinking behind a plate of cold toast while he triumphed. Tonight it was him, shrinking, unable to summon even the armor of his voice. For me it was not conquest. It was clear. For him, it was the quiet ruin of every illusion he had clung to. The music swelled. Glasses clinked. The celebration carried on. And at the far edge of the hall, my brother stood silent, not out of choice, but because the truth had left him with nothing left to say. The gala had ended in a blur of applause, champagne flutes, and glittering laughter. But the pantry was another world. Its humming refrigerator and faint scent of coffee grounds made it feel plain, almost too plain, after the spectacle of Rainier Glass Hall. I had slipped away to breathe, to let the weight of the evening fall from my shoulders, when I felt the air shift behind me. Daniel stood in the doorway. The sharpness of his usual swagger was missing, replaced by something frayed at the edges. His suit still tried to carry authority, but the fabric told a truer story, creased, tired, no longer able to disguise the man inside. He closed the distance quickly, as if afraid the courage might leak out of him if he delayed. His voice cracked before it fully formed. You signed my paycheck." The words hung between us, brittle and jagged, the disbelief in them louder than the sound itself. I turned, meeting his eyes. The flicker there was not the confidence of the older brother who used to tower over me, but something closer to fear. My answer came steady, unshaken. "That's my job." There was no flourish in my tone, no hidden sharpness. It was a simple fact delivered with the calm weight of truth. Daniel's laugh came out strangled, half cough, half protest. It rattled in the small room, clashing with the quiet hum of the espresso machine. He leaned back against the counter, one hand bracing himself, the other dragging over his jaw in a restless motion. His head shook as if the world had tilted too far for him to recognize it. "I owe you more than I ever thought," he muttered, the words scraping from his throat, like they had fought their way out. I stood still, my hands loosely folded. Inside, the tide of old wounds surged, every brunch where his words had cut into me, every time he dismissed me as invisible. Yet in this cramped pantry, surrounded by fluorescent light and the faint clatter of dishes in the hallway, I did not feel anger. I felt something else, quieter but heavier, the recognition that the truth itself had done the work I never needed to force. There was no need for an apology, no need for grand reconciliation. What existed between us now was not forgiveness, but honesty. A fragile thread, yes, but one strong enough to shift the weight of years. He had asked the question. I answered, and that was enough. Daniel turned slightly, his back half toward me, his posture caught in hesitation. For a breath, the silence between us grew thick, almost bending with the weight of all we had left unsaid. My mind drifted back to our childhood, the pedestal he had been placed on, the shadows I had been pushed into, the years carved by pride and silence. Now, for the first time, that pedestal had cracked. He lingered there, shoulders stiff as though torn between walking away and reaching back. His reflection trembled in the chrome of the coffee machine. No longer the man he had pretended to be, but someone smaller, stripped of pretense. I did not move. I stood my ground, a quiet sentinel in this small domestic space that had suddenly become the stage for a reckoning I had long stopped waiting for. The muffled music of the gala leaked through the door, distant and irrelevant. Inside this plain room, the truth had settled. It did not roar, it did not beg. It simply existed, undeniable. And for the first time in years, I watched Daniel bow his head, not to me, but to the truth itself. The scent of burnt sugar and bacon grease clung to the air inside Maple Street Cafe, the same cafe where I had once sat with my shoulders hunched, swallowing my humiliation with cold toast. But today was different. A month had passed since the gala, a month of quiet code, of long nights with nothing but the hum of my laptop for company, and something in me had shifted. I walked into that cafe no longer as the girl hiding behind silence, but as someone who had found her footing in the storm. The family was already there. My father Robert tapped his newspaper, like a man trying to hold on to routine. My mother Linda fussed with napkins, her nervous energy spilling across the table. Aunt Laura had her usual pinched smile, half polite, half skeptical. And Daniel sat straight. Expression unreadable, but his presence itself carried a new gravity. Then came Uncle Henry. His chin wobbled as he leaned forward, voice dripping with the same contempt he had rehearsed for years. "Claire's still tapping away at that machine of yours at home." His laugh was sharp, like silverware scraped against glass, a sound that used to shrink me inside myself. I opened my mouth, but before I could breathe out a sigh, Daniel set his coffee cup down. The porcelain met the table with a decisive thud that cut through the chatter around us. He looked Henry straight in the eye. His voice was firm, steady, carrying no theatrics, only truth. "Claire is the smartest person in this room, Uncle Henry. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't even have a paycheck to collect." The cafe seemed to still be there. Forks paused mid-air, conversations dipped into silence. My father froze, the lines on his face hardening as though someone had struck him. The genial mask he wore in family gatherings cracked, revealing a discomfort he could not hide. My mother's eyes glossed with tears, her lips trembling as she nodded ever so slightly, a gesture of apology, years too late but deeply felt. Aunt Laura gave the faintest of nods, surprising me. Her usual resistance softened for the first time I could remember. And I stayed silent. But this time, my silence was not a shield. It was freedom. A small smile touched my lips, not out of triumph, not out of vengeance, but out of release. The weight I had carried, the endless craving for recognition, dissolved like morning mist under sunlight. Inside me, words stirred, but remained unspoken, a truth too intimate for the cafe walls. Justice does not always arrive in thunder or fury. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a simple sentence that bends the proudest heads. The noise of the cafe swelled again, but it no longer pressed against me. It washed over like a tide I no longer feared. I looked around the table at faces that had once carved deep scars into me, and I did not feel anger. I felt distant clarity, as though I were gazing at them from the calm of another shore. The gap between us had not disappeared. It might never. But it was no longer mine to carry alone. And as I lifted my cup, sipping slowly, I thought of how strange it was that sometimes the most profound reckonings come not with raised voices, but with quiet recognition. Sometimes late understanding feels like too little too late. Yet even then, it can open a quiet door toward healing. Have you ever longed for your family to finally see your worth? Share